The Taylor family is large, well known, and respected throughout southwestern Virginia. In the spring of 1836, with great joy, William P. Taylor and his wife, Mary Polly Stallard, announced the birth of their first child, Marshall Benton Taylor, to family, friends, and neighbors who had gathered for the occasion at their family farm in Scott County. In all, there would be 6 children born to William and Mary before her death in 1846. William would remarry Edith Catherine Ashworth and have 7 more children by her. Although he had a reputation as a quiet and studious youth, farm work is never easy, even in a large family, and Marshall would become a sturdy, well-built young man by the time he married Nancy Ann Booth in 1854 at the age of 18. Even though he had no formal education, he had a strong inclination towards herb lore, and informally studied medicine with his uncle, Dr. Stallard of Lee County, with the goal of becoming a country doctor. However, he would only practice medicine for a few months before answering the call of Virginia for troops in 1861. At the age of 25, Dr. Marshall Benton Taylor would enlist with the 64th Virginia Mounted Infantry, leaving behind his wife, 3 young daughters, and his newborn infant son. As it has been so often noted, war changes people, and when Dr. Taylor returned home 4 years later, he announced to his family and friends that he had had enough killing and wanted no more. He soon resumed his duties as a traveling country doctor in a wide, remotely settled area along the border of Kentucky and Virginia, where he lived for many quiet years, enjoying the confidence of his patients and friends, and would eventually become their spiritual advisor as well, first in the Methodist faith, and later that of the Swedenborg faith. In 1876, he was accused of the murder of an outlaw by the name of Robert Moore in the presence of the man's wife in their Wise County home. Although there was no evidence, Moore's neighbors were sure that Doc Taylor had killed the man. However, after a short trial, Dr. Marshall Taylor was acquitted of the crime because no direct testimony was offered against him. It is often said that after this incident, Dr. Taylor was never seen unarmed. However, there is also no evidence to support this claim as well. During the war, Doc Taylor had developed the reputation of being a brave and generous comrade at arms. Over the course of his life, he would also develop the reputation of being a faithful, loyal friend, compassionate doctor, and zealous preacher. However, it would be after the murder of a close friend that he would learn to use all these skills together, and in doing so become known as the Red Fox. After the Civil War, the mountainous region of southwestern Virginia and eastern Kentucky would become a hotbed of strife. In this area, the term brother against brother and family against family would have a dramatic impact like no other part of the country, sparking feuds that would last for decades. However, in the 1880s, these feuds would take on a much more deadly aspect. Much like the Revolutionary War, the country found itself in great debt that they were unable to pay after the Civil War. To alleviate part of these debts, large tracts of land were given to former Union soldiers in lieu of pay. In the mountain regions running from Tennessee into West Virginia, a tremendous amount of land was not always owned. Suddenly, land that had been claimed by families for generations was given over to complete strangers, or even worse, to a friend or family member who had fought on the side of the Union. In some cases, entire families were forcibly relocated. In others, they were allowed to continue to work the land and pay a lease, usually consisting of part of the crops, thus turning entire families to indentured servants to live upon land that had been claimed by them for generations. In the latter half of the 1870s, prospectors had started coming to the mountains of southwestern Virginia. Suddenly, land that had been good for nothing but timber and crops became immensely valuable as iron and coal was discovered in the area. In the 1880s, Henry Vanover of the Upper Elkhorn Creek of Pike County, Kentucky, found himself in such a situation. Henry had been given 900 acres of land in Kentucky near the Virginia border for services to his country. Although he never sold any of the land, he had become wealthy by selling the timber off the land. In May of 1879, Henry Vanover's niece, Polly Lorenza Estep, the daughter of his sister Mary and John Estep, married Ira Mullins, the son of John L. and Martha Mullins of Pike County, and within just a few years trouble arose. In the mid-'80s, Ira and Polly built a cabin on Henry's land, near the present-day Camden section of Jenkins, Kentucky. Although Henry told Ira and his niece that they were on his property, there is nothing to indicate that he had asked them to leave, either verbally or in the court records. In 1883, Richard Brose came to the head of the Elkhorn Creek and started a survey on Henry's land. In short order, it was announced that Brose had found the richest coal lands in the country. Overnight, Henry's land became immensely valuable, and it is about this time that someone started trying to get rid of Henry Vanover. One evening, Henry was sitting on the porch of his home, enjoying the cool evening breeze with his family after a hard day's work. Suddenly, a man came riding up the middle of the creek that ran near Henry's home, shooting at Henry and his family. Henry quickly grabbed his gun and returned fire. The would-be assassin was killed. However, Henry was arrested, tried for murder, but was acquitted. The dead assassin was named Roberts, a man from Ohio who just happened to be a house guest of Ira Mullins. In 1887, while working in a field, Henry Vanover would be murdered. Although the actual killer of Henry remains unknown, it was widely thought that Clifton Branham had murdered him. Clifton was arrested and tried for the crime. However, Clifton had denied the Vanover murder, but did admit to conspiracy by claiming, quote, "I got some money for the killing, but I did not kill Henry Vanover," unquote. Although there was little evidence, and Clifton claimed to be at home with his wife and family that day, he was convicted of conspiracy and criminal complicity, and would spend 15 years of a 90-year term in prison. If Clifton Branham had knowledge of who actually killed Henry Vanover, he kept silent about it. He also never told who he had received money from for the assassination. However, everyone suspected it was from Ira Mullins and his wife Lorenza, based upon the previous failed assassination attempt. Dr. Taylor had been very good friends with Henry Vanover and his family. After Henry's death, his widow had over 100 court cases come against her in the forms of claims against her land. Dr. Marshall Benton Taylor would become involved in many of them as witness for the defense. It is often claimed that the feud between Ira Mullins and Dr. Taylor had begun after the shootout at the Wise Courthouse in the fall of 1891. However, it is of great interest to note that Doc had become a federal marshal in 1889, 2 years after the death of Henry Vanover, and immediately started what some would come to say was a personal vendetta against moonshiners. It is also of great interest to note that Doc specialized in catching moonshiners coming from Kentucky into Virginia, and his favorite target always seemed to be the shipments of Ira Mullins. It is over the next 3 years that Dr. Marshall Benton Taylor would gain his reputation as a lawman and revenuer, and along with this reputation came the nickname the Red Fox. Doc had already gained the reputation of a mystic from his patients and those who had heard him preach because of the way he prayed and his claims that he spoke with spirits. As a revenue agent, the tactics he used to catch moonshiners took these claims to whole new levels, as Doc seemed to be able to melt into the forest, travel long distances in short times, and appear and disappear at will. We have often stated that even the smallest of things said in a story passed down by word of mouth or recorded in books and newspapers often lead to a treasure of information. However, in this instance, they have led to even more unanswered questions. And one of the biggest mysteries, and by far the largest unanswered question in the story of the Killing Rock is, who is Amanda Jane Mullins? And before we can go any further, we must establish exactly who she is and her role in the trial and the events afterward. In the testimony of Doc Swindle, he had testified that Dr. Taylor had come to him unexpectedly and told him to keep Ira Mullins located until a certain trouble had cleared up, and that he would be at Swindle's house every other night till it was over. This testimony came up during the trial. However, at least two of the multiple websites state that this trouble had to do with a loose woman staying at Ira's house. Although the testimony of the loose woman never came up in trial, we have to ask, who was this loose woman? There is no explanation given. However, all of the mysteries surrounding the entire incident may explain this claim of a loose woman, especially when we look at the biggest mysteries of the entire story. The only hard concrete evidence easily found on Jane Mullins is that she was Wilson's wife. This is easily verified by the 1880 census, where she is listed in Pike County in the Upper Elkhorn Creek District simply as, quote, Jane Mullins, wife, unquote. We are told from the various websites that she is Ira Mullins' sister. Some sites claim that she was his daughter. However, there is no evidence for her being his daughter, and the genealogy websites listing her as his sister are contradictory. Some have her listed as Amanda Jane Mullins with a birth date listed as born about 1855, while others have her birth date ranging from 1851 to 1857, while some have no birth date for her at all. By far, the strangest websites have Amanda Mullins listed with a birth date of May 5, 1855, and another sister named Jane Mullins with no birth date, or some even has it listed the other way around. Combine this with the fact that there is no clear evidence for her death. There are two clues found in the story of the apprehension of the Fleming brothers. In this story, we are told that Cal was killed and Heenan was captured. However, when Heenan comes to trial on July 24, 1894, he is acquitted because Jane Mullins had died. For now, we will focus on this clue and come back to the second clue later. This puts Jane's death at a fixed point sometime before July 1894. However, the Murdered Man Cemetery site has her grave with a marker stating that she passed away in February 15, 1892. Nearly 4 months before the massacre, and some sites give her death as being February the 15th, 1895. The genealogy sites are of no help either, as they have her death ranging from 1892 to 1948. This in and of itself is further complicated in the fact that there is another Jane Mullins in the story. Rebecca Jane Mullins was the daughter of Booker Basil or Cripple Basil Mullins and America Baker. She was born on May 5, 1855, and has a sister named Amanda M. Mullins, born in 1857, who married a man named Benjamin Taylor. It is often stated that Rebecca Jane Mullins had 2 children by Dr. Taylor and was his second wife. However, although Dr. Taylor did buy her a house on Bold Camp in Pound, Virginia, they would never marry. There are remarkable similarities between these two women. She, like Ira's sister Jane, was first cousins to Jane's husband, Wilson Mullins. Both had daughters of similar age. Jane and Wilson had a daughter in 1881 named Amarinda Mullins, who went by the name Mindy. Rebecca Jane Mullins had a daughter by an unknown father in 1885 named America Mullins. She was named after Rebecca's mother and went by the name Mandy. However, according to the 1870 census, Jane Mullins, the wife of Wilson and sister to Ira, was named Amoda Jane Mullins, and as at least 2 genealogists had reported, she was also known as Mona. She was born on May 5, 1855 as well. I believe that, like us, When we first encountered the coincidences in their names and the names of their children, along with the contradicting dates for Jane Mullins, most people get these women mixed up. However, it is our belief that Amanda M. Mullins has also gotten mixed into the character of Jane Mullins, as one of the birth dates for Jane matches hers, and Amanda also married a man named Taylor. And even though they were never married, Rebecca Jane is often called Marshall Taylor's second wife. We believe that this is why multiple stories and websites report Ira's sister's name as being Amanda Jane Mullins. While it is true that the 1860 census report states that her name is Amanda, when viewing the microfilm of the document, however, it is spelled Amoda, Amoda Jane Mullins, and this is how it is reported in the birth and death registries. However, the mystery surrounding Jane Mullins does not stop here. Situated just off US 23 on the Kentucky-Virginia border is the picturesque little town of Jenkins, Kentucky. The town is unique for quite a few reasons, the largest of which is that in the spring of 1910 it did not exist. And yet, within 15 years, the Consolidation Coal Company would build a thriving modern city of 10,000 people. The David A. Zagier Coal and Railroad Museum invites you to come and discover the history of this small eastern Kentucky town that in 1913 inspired a journalist with the Ashland Daily Independent to write, quote, Jenkins, a modern city in the mountains and the newly found capital of an inland empire whose lakefront and clubhouse looks more like a resort than a mining camp, unquote. Located in downtown Jenkins, the museum is housed in a restored 1921 train depot and houses a fine collection of photographs, artifacts, and script from the coal camp era, which includes over 40 years of memorabilia collected by David A. Zagier, former manager of the Beth Elkhorn Corporation and Assistant Secretary of Labor for the Mine Safety and Health Administration. The museum is open Tuesday through Saturday from 11 to 5. And from 1 to 5 on Sundays, and is a perfect place to learn about the history of not only Jenkins, but the rest of Letcher County during the Jenkins Homecoming Festival in August, which kicks off a series of festivals throughout the county that runs well into September, culminating with the Mountain Heritage Festival in the county seat of Whitesburg. We look forward to seeing you there. Within an hour or two of the attack, many people had arrived at the site of the ambush, and the crime scene was well documented by John Benton and Robert Mullins. There were numerous bullet holes in the wagon, and the horses pulling it had been killed. Ira Mullins was found in the wagon lying on a pallet of straw covering a load of whiskey. He had been killed almost instantly with 8 shots. The body of John Chappell was also in the wagon, his body showing evidence of 6 shots. Greenberry Harris was found close to the rear of the wagon, shot twice in the head and once in the heart. Several feet in front of the wagon, Wilson Mullins lay on his face in the middle of the road, shot through the heart. Lorenza Mullins lay about 5 feet from one side of the wagon, her legs broken and doubled back under her. She had been shot multiple times in the chest. Her apron and dress were over her head. However, the body of Jane and her horse were nowhere to be found. A search of the area turned up little. The attackers had piled up rocks and brush in the cleft between the 2 rocks. It was thought that the brush had been cut for several days. There was a little path leading to the road, but there were no tracks. In the spot that it was thought the men did the shooting, 6 rimfire cartridge shells were found under a small pile of pine cones. They looked as if they had been laid down and then covered. The shells were for a government-issued rifle, and John Bentley and Robert Mullins only knew 2 men who owned such a rifle, Henry Adams and James Fodder. They also found several small pieces of green cloth thought to have been used by the attackers as veils, along with an old army haversack. At first it was thought that the attack was a robbery. John Harrison Mullins had reported that his mother had all the family's money, about $1,000 in a purse carried in the wagon and on a sash that she wore under her garments. The purse was found cut to pieces a short distance from her body, but the money sash was never found. Sometime later that evening, Jane returned with family and neighbors from Kentucky and gave her account of the massacre and stated that she, quote, did not know who the attackers were, unquote. There are a couple of things in this report that is of the utmost importance. First, that John Bentley and Robert Mullins did a thorough report of the crime scene. Second is the finding of the rimfire shells and the suspects based on the findings of those shells. Quote, 6 rimfire cartridge shells found under a small pile of pine cones that looked as if they had been laid down and then covered, unquote. This sounds as if the evidence was planted. Why would the killers lay 6 shells down and cover them with pine cones? The suspects based on those shells were Henry Adams and James Fodder because, quote, the shells were for a government-issued rifle, unquote. This becomes of the utmost importance later, because there was an indictment issued for Henry Adams, and we are often told that he was never brought to trial, and that the charges against him were eventually dropped in 1901. In addition, we are told Henry claimed his innocence on his deathbed. However, on October the 26th, 1892, an article appeared in the Comet, a local newspaper from Johnson City, Tennessee, that stated that Henry Adams was arrested and charged with complicity in the Mullins massacre, but the trial was postponed for some reason and that Henry Adams was released on a $1,000 bond. This raises a question. In 1892, $1,000 would be worth over $26,000 today. Where did Henry get this money? The article further states that the chief witness against Henry was Jeff Fleming, Cal and Heenan's father, and that his testimony so enraged Adams and his friends that they swore vengeance against Fleming and his sons, and that Adams and his friends were now said to be hiding somewhere in the Cumberland Mountains. The second is James Fodder. He is of special interest for a couple of reasons. First, he was never indicted, nor was he subpoenaed to court. Yet, in addition to being named a suspect, he plays a critical role in the investigation and becomes a chief focus of testimony in the trial. It is also of importance to take note of Jane's statement to those investigating the crime scene. Jane had said, quote, that she did not know who they were, unquote, and would continue to do so for 5 days after the ambush. However, as we will discuss in detail later, none of Jane's statements made to the investigators, her friends, and neighbors, nor during the trial matched the crime scene. The article about Adams finishes up with a statement that the Flemings had sent word to the Commonwealth's attorney that they would surrender if he would allow them to turn state's evidence against the murderers of the Mullins party. It goes on to state that there were at least a dozen men involved in the crime, and that some of the men involved were highly connected. This would, in fact, be the second article stating that the Flemings wanted to surrender and turn state's evidence. The third would come after Cal was killed and Heenan arrested. The first article, however, appeared just days before the botched arrest attempt in June of 1892.